Well, we are extremely happy to be back to Out of the Main this week, John, because we're going to test a theory. The theory being you should never meet your heroes.
Well, yeah, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know. You stumped me on this, and I thought you were going somewhere else. So I'm sorry. I apologize. Just continue on and pretend like I'm not here.
Oh, okay. Can do. All right. So this will be a two-person conversation. We are so honored and fired up to bring on someone you may know as a founding member of Steely Dan. You may know as a longtime guitarist with the Doobie Brothers, and listeners to this podcast may even know him as Prolific Session Cat. His friends know him as Skunk, and we are fired up to welcome Jeff Skunk Baxter to the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Happy to be here.
This really is an honor. I got to tell you that John's, obviously, by looking at him, much older than me. He's been listening to your music since the 70s, and he's the reason I got into your music.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Thanks, John.
Yeah. You know what? I actually was just doing a little noodling around before we came on here. And about 5 minutes before we started, I stumbled across, not even in my notes, a video of you with Linda Ronstadt playing congas. Do you remember 1973? It was it Bandstand, I think, that I saw?
It was either the Midnight Special or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a first. I'm looking for guitar hero stuff, and I come across Jeff on the congas. So, man of many skills.
Well, if you're a studio rat, you got to do what you got to do. And Paulinho da Costa, who was supposed to show for the show, probably one of the most incredible percussionists who walked the planet, couldn't make it. So, actually, I grew up in Mexico and Mexico City, and I started out playing drums. So I grew up in that genre, and so I learned to play congas when I was a little kid. And when nobody shows, you gotta step up, right?
Yeah, you should see a time. I mean, because you clearly knew the technique. It wasn't just some guitar guy banging on congas. I mean, he knew the muting and the palms and the slaps and all that stuff. So it was really interesting. But Tom, please get us back on course.
Yeah, you weren't even supposed to be part of this podcast. Now you're already chiming in. What's going on?
I know.
Well, one of the many reasons we're excited to have you on, Skunk, is because we just realized that you've got newer material out that somehow fell under my radar. Shame on me, because this new, I'll call it a new album. You tell us when it came out, but the Speed of Heat album is absolute fire, as the kids say. It's awesome. So Speed of Heat, you've been working on this, you say, for decades practically, right?
About 13 years. When we turned in the track sheets, we noticed that one of the track sheets was dated 13 years ago. So yeah, my music partner, CJ Vanston, who's a phenomenal musician, we co-produced it, co-writer. We started working on it years and years ago. We met actually in Chicago. They used to fly me into Chicago to do jingles with a number of the jingle production houses there. And one day, 7 a.m. in the morning, I show up, and then there's this guy, CJ, playing keyboards, and the producer comes in, baked. And so
7 a.m.
Yeah, well, it's usually, it's downbeat. We were doing 5, 6, 7 jingles a day. I'd come in on a Monday and leave on Friday night. And so he hands out the music, and it says Hyatt, which I assume meant that we were going to do a Hyatt hotel commercial. And then it had a time signature and a key signature, 64 bars, and no music. And so he said, "Well, you guys ready?" And I said, "Remember, if you're a studio guy, you're always ready, no matter what they throw at you. So what if there was no music?" So I just said, I looked at CJ and I said, "Well, pleased to meet you. Okay, I want you to roll tape, give us a click." And we just composed the song on the fly. And the client liked it. Bobby, the producer, liked it. And after the session, I said to CJ, that's pretty phenomenal that we could actually compose this stuff on the fly. I said, if I ever do a solo record, I'd love to work with you. And he said, if you ever do a solo record, I'll be there in a heartbeat. So he moved out to Los Angeles, and he's a first call studio guy and a producer as well on his own in his own right. And we started finding time where we would just get together and see what was what. And after a while, we began to realize that we were building up a catalog of well, I call it data, but because it's on a computer, but we were building a catalog of music and performances, and maybe we ought to, like, do this more, kind of. So that's kind of how it went out.
Wow. And of course, our audience, myself, when I saw this, immediately I go to the track listing and I recognize a couple of titles from back in your Steely Dan days. Do It Again, which we'll get to. But obviously my old school was the one that's going to catch everybody's attention. It's one of the few vocal songs on the album. And I read the story about how the vocal, well, let me go back. When I first heard it, I thought this has so much power to it. You brought a power rock sensibility to it. And before I even read the bio, I said, it sounds like Steely Dan meets like the rock energy of Bon Jovi. Wow. Then I read the bio and I found out what you were thinking in terms of who was going to sing it. And if you'd love to tell people that story.
Well, pretty straight ahead. I used to sing the song live with Steely Dan. And so every time we would do it, I could feel it. I knew the song had the potential for a lot more energy. And every time we would play it, it would get more and more powerful. And then years later, when the opportunity came to do this, I thought, well, why don't I give it a shot in terms of arranging it? So I arranged what I thought was a kind of a thermonuclear rock version of it. I laid down a scratch vocal and sent it off to Steve Tyler, who's an old friend. And I said, Steve, would you like to sing this? I think you'd be great. And he said, well, yeah, but who's singing this? I said, well, it's me. It's just a scratch vocal to let you know where it is. And so, well, why don't you sing it? I said, come on, man. I'm not a singer. He says, listen, you should really do it. And I said, you're bullshitting me, right? I said, no, I actually believe it. And he's a friend, so I didn't think he would be kidding me. Yeah. And he knows way more about this stuff than I do. So I said, okay, I'll take my best shot. I forgot to list it on the album. but what the hell?
Makes it more interesting. Who did all the backups vocal. Then?
Pardon?
Who did all the backups then, all the harmonies? Is that you too?
Myself, CJ, and a fantastic singer named Rick Livingston, who's the lead singer on that cut Insecurity.
Okay.
The version absolutely smokes. I told John yesterday, I was like, I got to figure out the right way to say the song is now complete in a way that I never knew something was missing before. But when I hear this version, I'm like, that's, like you said, that's the one that we should have been the version all along. It just rocks. And speaking of liner notes, so our audience are these personnel geeks, features an organ solo by David Page, which is cool.
Oh yeah.
And that rips.
Those guys are like, well, of course, Steve Lukather is an old friend. We've done a million recording sessions together, and David as well. We worked in the studio, when Jeff Porcaro and myself and all of us were and still kind of are studio rats. And when I told Dave I was doing a solo album, and I told him I was going to do my old school, he called me. He said, I'm doing the organ solo. I said, yeah, damn right. Absolutely.
You killed it.
There's so many tribute bands out there, Steely Dan tribute bands, that have tackled that song. And every guitarist, I think, feels compelled to play it the way it was the original. They want to learn the original solo exactly as it is. And that was you, correct, the first time around?
Yes.
So now approaching it then this time, what did you feel? Like, you're like, well, I did it that way before. So therefore, I mean, did any of the thought about, do you bring anything from the previous version into it, or what was your approach?
Well, I thought, okay, I did that. There it is. And since I was going to reimagine the song, I should reimagine it from the ground up. And the arrangement is different from the original. And so I thought, okay, well, a great song is a great song, and that is a great song. and so it will hold up under any kind of arrangement. So yeah, I wanted to reimagine it completely.
Speaking of great songs, speaking of personnel, I want to ask this question before it comes up, because the first time I listened to this CD or I spun the record, I did so purposely without reading any of the notes. I just wanted to go in completely blind and cold. So, John, there's a moment that comes up, and I'm sure you know what it is, where you're listening, the intro starts, and then there's a voice, and I just get chills. It's like chills, and then it's like, so you can play it. Michael McDonald and Skunk Baxter back together again, and the song is just awesome. So, was he a willing participant, or did you have to cajole him at all?
No, just the opposite. I was originally going to do an instrumental album. I mean, I grew up with the Ventures. Actually, ended up playing with them and producing records with them. They were my idols, when I was a kid. And of course, my dad had a great jazz collection. I listened to a lot of Django Reinhardt, Charlie Christian, and Wes Montgomery. Howard Roberts was my virtual mentor. So we got to the point where I wanted to do like an instrumental record. So the first one I wanted to do, of course, was Apache, because I think that's probably one of the most iconic instrumentals ever written. And the same way, okay, I'm going to reimagine it. I think it's an incredible song, but I wanted to reimagine it. And I was just going to do an instrumental record. So I was up in Santa Barbara doing a charity event with Michael. And Mike said, "What are you up to?" I said, "Well, I'm going to take a shot at this solo album stuff." And he said, "Well, if you'd like me to do something on it, I'd be happy to." And as we say at Lawrence Livermore, which is one of the places that I work at MIT, it took me one femtosecond to change the whole album concept to, okay, we're going to do some vocals now. And with Johnny Lang and Clint Black, the idea, we said, okay, we got some ground rules. The ground rules are that you write with myself and CJ, and that you do something that you've never done before. You go to a place that's out of your wheelhouse. I mean, if you listen to the Clint Black track, I played it for his wife, and she half jokingly said, "Who the hell is that?" I said, "That's your husband. He's an unbelievable musician." And the same thing with Johnny Lang. When he heard the chorus on "I Can Do Without It," he went, "I'm a heavy metal guy." I said, "Damn right, Bab." You know. So when Michael came down, we started and we wrote and we composed together. And I got to tell you, I think it's one of the best things Michael's ever done, because you really stepped out completely. And there was a little while where he wasn't really sure he even liked it. And then a few months later, he called me up and says, "I really love this." I said, "Michael, you nailed the shit out of this."
He did.
Yeah, it was so, I don't even know what it is. And that's probably good, because I hate labels. Labeling things, trying to describe something. It just is what it is. And we got a chance also. I love the call and response with Michael. That was half the fun. Kind of like the Rod Stewart, Jeff Beck dynamic. And so I did want to do something where we could share that again.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I hope no one would take this the wrong way, but I feel like that's the best vocal I've heard from Michael in years. I mean, it's really just outstanding, John.
Yeah, and to what he's saying, it's not a Michael style song. It's not all of a sudden we're bringing the R&B thing. That almost sounds like a soundtrack piece. I noticed that going through this record, that there are moments that it does feel like there is a soundtrack composer involved. You know, a song like that one you mentioned, Apache, Giselle is another one. So it
yeah, we thought that sounded like a French movie.
Yeah,
that's why we called it Giselle.
There's just, and it allowed you to use so many of the familiar textures that we know from you. You know that the lead, the rock and lead stuff. You sound like a 20-year-old energy just bursting forth when you're playing that, and then you've got that very familiar, like heavily compressed, clean thing that you do. The pedal steel we get from the Rose. It's like if you know what Jeff has done, I'm talking to the fans, if you know what he's done over the years, it's all in here. But as Tom knows, I get worried about guitar records, or when the guitarist is on the front, I worry that it's going to be a gratuitous, just wail for 35 minutes. And everything is so tastefully, musically done.
Well, thank you. And CJ, again, to his credit, I mean, he's written a lot of soundtracks. Waiting for Guffman. He's done a lot of movie composition. I've done a lot of composition. I worked a lot with Lalo Schifrin. So to me, there's a visual. You're right. There is a visual part to everything I try to do, I'm not. Maybe I'm not conscious of it, but you're right. I've spent so much time connecting audio and visual.
Right.
You're right. There's probably a connection there. And you mentioned the pedal steel. I think the pedal steel is the greatest instrument ever invented. The fact that it was first designed with aircraft cables and pulleys, it's a totally American instrument. I mean, it was designed. I play a showbud, but I do have a Sierra pedal steel that was designed and built by the former program manager for the F-14 Tomcat. Precision. I mean, these instruments are so precise and they're so unlimited. I love the voice of the steel, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to take a shot here and do an a cappella pedal steel part. I just want people to hear the voice. If I could sit back from the instrument, I mean, there she is back there, sitting back there. Nice. If I could just sit back and let it do its thing, I would do that. But I have to obviously interface with it to make it work. So I did an a cappella verse, which came from years ago when I was on the advisory board for Guitar Player magazine, and they had a 25th anniversary celebration. And they said, listen, Skunk, would you play something while we roll photographs of those of our colleagues who have, passed on? And I said, sure. And I hadn't come up with an idea. And then I heard the Rose on the radio. I said, it's got to be one of the most beautiful melodies ever. I mean, it's Mozart. So, or a combination of Mozart and Chopin, the way it is constructed, very simple, very straight ahead. So I went out on stage and I played the first verse of the Rose a cappella. And just when I got to the end of the first verse, Adrian Blue came out. Oh. And Adrian's an old friend and a wonderful guitar player. He plugs in, and next thing I know, by the time we get to the end of the second verse, I've got a keyboard player, a drummer, and a bass player, and away we go. So years later, I thought, this song has composed itself. And I needed something on this record as a tribute to my father, who was played a huge part in my life. And I wanted to do something for him. And I could never really say how I felt. So I thought the best thing I could do was play this song. And actually, at the end of the tune, I can hardly see because my eyes are just, full of tears. So the last stuff that I play was really talking to my dad on that cut.
Wow. Well, I had a question. Why the Rose? And I think
now we know.
It's more than I bargained for. I hope you don't mind if I take just a quick left turn here. We'll come back to this new record, but since you mentioned all this technology, you mentioned an F-14. I got to tell you, John and I were talking about you on the podcast years ago, and John brings up your Wikipedia page. It reads, more recently, he has worked as a defense consultant and advised U.S. members of Congress on missile defense.
And you thought I was joking.
I was like, wait, that can't be the same. Well, there's only one Jeff Skunk Baxter, right? So, and there's an interesting story how this came to pass, isn't there?
Well, yeah, and I'll try to make it as short as possible. Sort of the overarching dynamic is radar is just an electric guitar on steroids. Once you understand the physics of all of this, you can pretty much go down any road you want to. Mm-hmm. So many, many, many years ago, I started reading all the defense magazines, because I was consulting and still do for a number of companies. I've been with Roland for almost 50 years, Akai, Gibson, Fender, and much of what I did for Roland and did for Akai was bring the musical instrument world into the digital world, combining it with computers, digital technology, digital reproduction, et cetera, et cetera. The cutting edge of all that was Department of Defense, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, the DoD, Defense, Department of Defense, Air Force, and all the people that were involved. They were moving, especially in space communications and radars, when we were moving from analog to digital. Everything was moving in the digital direction. So I would read these magazines to get up to speed on what was going on. So I was over in England, and I have a friend of mine, his name is Nick Cook. He was a senior aviation editor for Jane's Defense Weekly, which is a very prestigious, it's like Defense Week, a very prestigious national security and defense publication. And Nick said to me, hey, there's this cool article I want to show you. You know, you can track the space shuttle with an S-band radar. Now, radar is divided into different bandwidths, S-band, R-band, X-band, and L-band. And I said, well, that's kind of interesting. And then something clicked in my mind, because the Aegis battle group defense system of the U.S. Navy is based on the S-band radar. So I go home, I call up a buddy of mine at JPL, who's a steel player. I said, John, I got some math I want you to do. So he did some math, and he calls me back and says, are you looking to track something with a low radar cross section? I said, yeah. He said, well, you can do it. So what I was trying to do is I was trying to figure out a way to track an incoming missile warhead. Wow. With this radar. So now that I knew I can do it, I wrote a paper. And my dad always said, when you got an idea, write it down. So I wrote it down, gave it to a congressman friend of mine who I've been working on. He was a chairman of the science subcommittee. We were working on the National Space Plane together. And so he gave it to the vice chairman of the Armed Services Committee, who called him up, said, what is this guy from Raytheon or Boeing or, Northrop Grumman? I said, no, he's a guitar player for the Doobie Brothers. Now, again, don't forget, Brian May just got his PhD.
That was my comparison. Yeah, you and Brian May.
And Paul Rivera from Rivera Amps is already working for the Air Force. Okay, so wow. there is a connection there. So I got a call from the vice chairman, from Congressman Kurt Whelan, said, would you be willing to serve on the Armed Services Committee on Missile Defense? I said, yeah, sure. What does that mean? So I meant getting strapped in a chair, taking a polygraph, getting clearances, getting sent out to Lawrence Livermore to work on high energy diode pump solid state lasers and some other technologies I can't talk about, and to go to the Pentagon and work at what at the time was SDIO, the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization. And I got to tell you, it was great in the Senate and the Congressional Confirmation hearing when the General Mal O'Neill, 3-star general, was sitting up there and they were confirming me. He turned around, the look on his face was classic, like, what? Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, huh? And we became good friends, and I've worked for every director with SDIO, Ballistic Missile Defense Organization, and the Missile Defense Agency since the beginning. And I'm back working with the new director.
Unbelievable. John, now we just got to figure out a way to weaponize the mind of Jay Graydon, because he's got all this stuff.
Jeez.
I love Jay.
Everything would be in phase, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
I love Jay. He's one of my favorite people on the planet. We did a lot of sessions together.
I could see you guys getting along, yeah.
Well, we not only got along, but we got totally loony. We did some really stupid stuff and got away with it. Because, if you're a studio musician, you have to have an attitude. Your attitude is, I can do anything.
Right.
It's like when Bobby handed out the music and there's no music.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Roll tape. Yeah, absolutely. We got this,
But then you spent, getting to my next question while we're in the Wayback Machine, you spent a lot of time, obviously, in semi-stable bands, too. So we know you spent the period with Steely Dan. And so you get their glossary of ideas and feels. And then you move to the Doobie Brothers, who at the time, they were still doing their more Southern rock sound, the Stampede album. And then, of course, you had to evolve through that, through what is known through yacht rock circles as the Michael McDonald era or the R&B era, the Blue-Eyed Soul. Now, through that period of the Doobie Brothers, was there a sweet spot, at least for you, that you enjoyed and thought like the vision that at least you had was starting to come to fruition? Because my guess would be like the Fault Line album, but I'd like to hear
Right on the
what you
money.
think. Okay.
Right on the money. Because when I brought Michael into the band, it was more to keep the momentum of the band, and because I had tremendous confidence in his musicianship when Tommy Johnson had his health problems and couldn't continue for a while. But bringing a keyboard player into an all guitar band changes the dynamic mucho, especially because I'm a chord guy. I just am a fan. You know, I have a jazz background and a classical piano background, so chords to me are the essence. Anybody can play lead. B.B. King said, "You're the best rhythm guitar player I ever heard in my life," and I took that as a huge compliment.
Oh yeah, wow.
But as we went into it, I started thinking, okay, there's this band, and including all the musicians that were there, Michael, but everybody else. The depth of talent in this band is deeper than the music that this band has already made. So maybe there's a way to move this noodle forward. So I suggested to the band that the band start working as a rhythm section. We're going to book sessions for Leo Sayer and Carly Simon and
Nicolette Larson,
and Nicolette
Now
Larson.
I got it. Yep.
And Hoyt Axton. And you guys are going to show up at 9 a.m. Downbeats at 9:30. If you screw up, you're fired. That's it. That's the way it works. That's my world. And that's a Steely Dan world, but that's also my world. And they rose to the occasion beautifully as a rhythm section. It was amazing to watch. And in the middle of the Living on the Fault Line album, Keith Knudsen turned to me and he said, "I dropped a snare drum beat in bar 51." And I thought, bingo, everybody's got it now. They see this. And to me, the Living on the Fault Line album, it's not a commercial album, but the musicianship on that record and the playing blows my mind. I mean, that's the Doobie Brothers. And there are probably people who went, "That's the Doobie Brothers?"
Right.
Okay, then that's fine. But just give some great musicians some slack to dig deep. And yeah, I would say that from my vision of what I thought that band could do was the Living on the Fault Line album. And that album had to be made to be able to get the band to do the Minute by Minute album.
Wow.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Steely Dan way. If you'll forgive somewhat a loaded question, somewhat open-ended question. You're the closest we've gotten to being able to ask somebody what it was like to work with Donald and Walter in the studio. And I'm wondering if that evolved up to the point where you end up then leaving the band, and we all know that what happened after that. So can you give us a sense for what it was like working with them in studio?
Well, I left the band because they didn't want to tour. And I was already touring with the Doobie Brothers. And when I hung up the phone, we were in a hotel room in London, I think. And I said, well, I'm not going to do the Doobie Brothers. I mean, I'm not going to do Steely Dan anymore. They don't want to tour. And in another femtosecond, they turned to me and said, well, you're in the Doobie Brothers now. Okay,
cool.
Good. Because I like to play live.
Yeah.
But being a studio musician, again, I have no problem with trying to attain perfection is the wrong word. Right. I would say if there is such a word as absolution, not being forgiven, but trying to attain a state of as absolute and complete as possible. So Donald and Walter were, very focused on wanting to get as close to perfection as they could. And I got no problem with that, mostly. there are performances that were lost because in the pursuit of that, sometimes things get lost.
Hmm.
But I would say for the most part, the the architecture, the structure of how to do that worked out very well. And especially because Roger Nichols, who engineered all of those records, just the unreal talented engineer. Roger and I were good friends. I miss him terribly. And he was a science geek as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he a nuclear engineer. I mean, he ran a nuclear power plant. He he his vision of perfection in audio fit, I believe, the mold of everything. So I didn't have a problem with it at all, frankly. And if they wanted to call somebody else to come in to play, fine, because I knew all these guys anyway. And I was doing so many sessions. It's not that I didn't love being in Steely Dan, and I didn't feel like I was a part of the band, but I didn't feel like somehow or other I was, somebody was taking away my candy or anything. There was plenty to do.
Yeah.
And I was having a great time.
Well,
Matter of fact, Steve Lukather and I were talking the other day. I think we're the only two guitar players who are both first call studio guys and in famous bands.
Oh, well, we'll have to bandy that one through on the podcast, Tom.
Right.
But so we try to, I only mention that not from a trying to be a conceited,
but it's a
jerk.
different perspective. It's a completely
but
different.
it brings all of that. It is a synthesis of all of that together.
Well, John, before you ask your next question, that's what I read somewhere recently where even Walter Becker himself he said, the minute I heard Chuck Rainey play, I realized I didn't need to be the bass player anymore. So even
at least not on everything, right?
He could step aside and bring other people in. So interesting.
Well, the question I was headed towards that relates to Steely Dan is one of your production projects. And I know it's a long time ago and details we know can be lost sometimes, but what do you remember about the production of Sneaker's debut album, which you produced, and you brought in a Steely Dan song on that? What is the genesis of that song? Was that something that the band had been working on, was in like the back burner and never got cut by Steely Dan?
Yeah.
Because I know there's a demo. And so what do you remember about producing Sneaker, and then why that Steely Dan song, if you can recall anything?
Well, a buddy of mine came to me with a demo of Sneaker, and I listened to it and I said, okay, these folks they're not Steely Dan, but they are in the mindset. And I thought, this probably is a no-brainer for me. I love the guitar playing. As a matter of fact, one of the guitar players was a co-writer for the song "Insecurity" on this record,
the new record.
When I heard it, I said, I really want to produce this because these guys get it. So that was a really enjoyable experience. And actually, the first album I ever produced, Paul Bliss, same way. These guys had thought this stuff through. There was a band called Cruel Shoes, which I almost produced, and they sent me a demo. And again, same thing. And they were really in that whole genre of the sort of Steely Dan architecture. So yeah, I enjoyed doing Sneaker, and we went to Japan to play, and we won something at the Tokyo Music Festival. It was pretty amazing.
And then the song "Don't Let Me In" came from. I was going to ask. I was going to say that was it was a Becker and Fagan tune. So do you remember? Was that like I was asking? Is that was it a Steely Dan discard or never got cut, or what made you pick that song? Because that was the lead tune off that record, if I recall.
Well, as a producer, I was looking for material besides what they were composing. I was looking outside.
Okay.
And I mean, I had a whole library of Steely Dan stuff that was never recorded.
I see.
And so I went through it, and I thought that would be a great song. These guys will really do this well.
So you mentioned that you love playing out. I see you have an upcoming set of dates to support this record. Is that right?
Yeah, we did an East Coast tour, and that was kind of fun. We played the Birchmere in Washington D.C., and if they dropped a bomb on that, we would have lost half the DOD and the IC on that one. But it was fun to have all my friends there.
Yeah.
And by the way, a lot of those guys are musicians. I mean, Dr. Edward Teller, the man that invented the hydrogen bomb, the man that I worked with until he passed away at Lawrence Livermore, was a concert pianist.
Oh my gosh.
Charlie Towns, the man that won the Nobel Prize for the laser, pianist. A lot of the people that showed up, General J. Raymond, drummer. All these, there's a huge connection between music, frequency, the physics of the universe, et cetera, et cetera. So when these guys came to play, it was my colleagues, but it was also, they were there to share a sort of a commonality. So we did an East Coast tour. I went to play at the Iridium in New York, which means a lot to me because Les Paul was an old friend, and I used to go play with him at the Iridium like once every 2 or 3 months, and it was fun because I grew up in Mexico City, but I was going to boarding school in Connecticut, so I would stay in the United States and work during my vacations, and a lot of time in the summers I was working in wedding bands. You know, back in the day, you're 13 years old. You're playing, you got a stack of fake books this high because the accordion player is 90 years old, sax player is 85, the drummer's 90, and you're 18 or 13, and you play the one Chuck Berry song every 20 songs for the kids, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
So, but you're learning all the standards. So I remember Les called me one day. He said, "Skunk, I'm doing this VH1 special. Nobody's damn kids know any goddamn songs." I said, "What's up, Les?" He said, "Well, I don't know any songs." I said, "Well, okay, what do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I want to do How High the Moon. I want to do On Green Dolphin Street. I want to do, Take the A Train." I said, "Well, yeah, that's no problem. I know all that stuff. And you got to play bass. Because that damn bass players know any goddamn song." So it was funny because they would play with, a lot of guys would go play with Les. And Les was very, very gracious. And he would play anything and everything. But when Les and I got to play, we would just start playing the standards. There's a nice YouTube video of myself and Les playing at the House of Blues doing Take the A Train, where we're just bebopping all over the place and having a great time. And I miss that. So when I went to the Iridium, I closed my eyes and there was less on my shoulder.
Yeah.
So we did the East Coast tour, did a Midwest tour. We went to Japan, toured that, did a West Coast tour, and now we're going to do another West Coast tour. And I don't understand the dynamics of what's happening with this record. I thought that songs like, My Old School and stuff would be radio friendly. Now we're on the charts on New Age with Giselle.
With Giselle, yeah.
For sure.
Smooth jazz with Juliet, which is a tone poem. That's a tune that we wrote. CJ and I wrote, set the drum machine, and we wrote the song.
Wow.
While we were playing it. Same with Giselle.
Oh my God.
I think that song with Clint Black is going to break in country.
Nice.
Okay. Great. I have no idea what's happening. So I think we're going to be touring more and more and more as this begins to evolve. So where are you guys located?
We're in Detroit.
We're in Detroit. Yeah.
Oh, so our bass player in our band is from Detroit, Hank Horton.
Oh.
Do you know Hank Horton, John?
I do not.
No.
Well, you should, because not only is he first called bass player, but he's the bass player for the Detroit Symphony.
Oh, wow.
This guy is frightening.
Wow.
As a player.
Speaking of Detroit, on your website, I could have swore I saw a glimpse of a picture of you in Wally Palmer from the Romantics.
Oh, yeah. I love Wally. Wally's a great friend. You bet.
We've got something in common. Good, because I've known Wally since the 90s, so interesting.
Oh, what a great musician and a great human being.
Yeah, he is.
We do a lot of charity shows together. We just have a lot of fun.
Oh, cool.
I got him a white Fender Jaguar because I want to see him surfing it up.
I'll keep an eye on him out here. Let you know if it
Yeah,
happens.
yeah.
We don't do a lot of surfing on Lake St. Clair, but
I
never know.
love surf music. I'm such a fan
Yeah.
of. I play a lot with Dean Torrance
See,
from Jan and Dean.
Graydon, get together with Graydon. He loves it too. So
He loves it, and so does Billy Gibbons. I found that out when we did a
Oh,
show
wow.
with Steve Cropper.
God,
I
can you
was
imagine the
up
three
in
of
the
them?
dressing room and I was playing a song I did with the Ventures, Bombora, and Billy comes and says, "What's that?" I said, "This is a tune I did with the Ventures." He goes, "I love surf music."
Oh my gosh.
So maybe myself, Elliot Easton, Jay Graydon, Billy, we should form a four-masted schooner surf band.
And then Tristan Bowden and Michael McDonald can surf to you guys while you're playing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Real quick, we only touched on what ended up being my favorite track, so I just wanted to bring it up because it's another sort of area that you explore and so many genres that you touch on. But you mentioned the Johnny Lang song, I Could Do Without. And is that Johnny Lang playing that guitar lead? Because it smokes.
Well, we're doing call and response.
Call and response. Okay, that's what I thought.
Because we met in at Sundance, the film festival. They had put together a band. We all jumped on stage. We played for about an hour. I had a great time, and we ended up doing a lot of call and response just because somehow or other it worked out and felt good. So after that, Johnny said, "Well, what are you up to?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing a solo record." But before that, he had asked me. He said, "Listen, I know that you're in law enforcement." I said, "Yeah, I did. It was LAPD 15 years, a bunch of other things." And he said, "I'd like to get into law enforcement." I said, "No problem. What do you want to do?" I said, "Best thing for you to do would probably be to be a reserve. I mean, you get sworn, you got to go to the academy, but you could, stay involved and not have to do it full time." I said, "Sure. Tell me where you are. I'll call the local sheriff. Hey, it's Officer Baxter. I got a recommendation for you guys." And but then he started to really ramp up the music thing, and that kind of fell by the wayside. So then he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Solo album." And he said, "Well, I'd love to play on it." I said, "In a heartbeat." So he comes down to LA, same rules, right? Compose with myself and CJ and do something out of your wheelhouse. So we work on the track, and it comes time to do a vocal. We don't have any vocal, we don't have any lyrics. So we tell him to go out in the studio, get in front of the microphone, and scat. Just make noises, vowel sounds and diphthongs, just scat along with the track. We recorded that. CJ and I then sat down with our rhyming dictionary and our thesaurus, et cetera, and matched words to the vowel and diphthong sounds, wrote a set of lyrics, and Johnny came down and said, "Whoa, where'd you get that? I didn't sing that."
That's cool.
And we said, "Sort of." And that's how that came out. And then when he heard the chorus, which is like thermonuclear, he said, "Wow, that's me." I said, "Damn right. I mean, you're an incredibly talented musician. There's nothing you can't do."
You know what I heard, John? I don't know if you heard the same thing, but I heard just maybe a touch of Ole Borud's most recent record on that track, or maybe some deep cut Prince even, where he likes to rock it and not release it as a single.
Yeah, but you can hear a little bit of like the R&B funk underneath it, underneath the rock. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well,
that's Insecurity. That's our ode to R&D funk.
Here we go. Yeah. I'm going to play a little of that. Yeah. You got any more questions, Tom? I'm kind of...
Well, why don't you, we'll cut this little jibber jabber out, but why don't you ask him about Do It Again, because both of our jaws were dropping about Do It Again. So you said we'd come back to it earlier. So.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. The last one, I mean, when I was looking at the song list and the Steely Dan tracks kind of caught my eye, Do It Again. And That is such a brilliant reimagining of that song, almost to the part where if you didn't know going in and didn't read that it was Do It Again, Beck or Fagan, you almost wouldn't recognize it as the tune. And you probably could have gotten away with calling it your own composition. But once you know that it's Do It Again and you're trying to search for the melody in there and then you find it and you're like, oh, that is so cool.
Well, again, CJ and I thought, okay, let's reimagine this.
Yeah.
First of all, I love shuffles. Give me a shuffle and I'm a happy camper. And we thought, okay, let's turn this on its head and see what we could do. And that's what came out of it. I love playing the song because it is a greasy, sleazy, slimy shuffle that just slimes its way from intro to end. You know, I love it. I just love the shuffle.
The different phrasing of the actual hook of the song too is what works so well, because you can't quite sing along to it, but you're like, damn, that's cool.
It's a great song, and great songs can be interpreted in a number of ways.
That's true. I just have one last question about your session days, because I was on your website. You've got a tab here that's called Interesting Stories, and I wonder if you would retell the quick story about your session. What you got called last minute to do a Donna Sommer session for the tune "Bad Girls"
and Hot Stuff.
Oh, both. Okay.
Yeah, mostly Hot Stuff because they were really looking. So yeah, my assistant said some guy named Giorgio Moroder called. I told him you weren't available. I said, well, call him back. So I spoke to Giorgio and he said, I want you to play on this record, Donna Sommer. I went, oh, okay. Who's that? That's great. You know, let me look at my schedule. I said, what kind of music is it? He said, disco. I went, okay, well, I said, call Jay Graydon. Because Jay and I used to go down to Marino's on Mondays and have breakfast, and we decide what the one riff we were going to play on every disco record for the next week. We were not trying to be disingenuous, but it was really getting, it was getting a little over the top. So I said, call Jay. He goes, screw that, call for Skunk. So Giorgio called me back. He said, I want you to play on this record. I said, well, what is it? He said, well, it's disco, but it's rock. I want you to make rock on it. And I said, okay, fine. So all my gear was in transition. I was moving, and I just didn't have a guitar for that day. So I went down to Guitar Center, and a buddy of mine used to run the place down there, Paul Herman. Actually, when I needed guitar parts, I would go down to Guitar Center to Paul's place. I'd find a nice guitar, I'd take it in the back room, smash it on the wall, say, hey, this is all screwed up. I can sell it to me for parts. And he knew exactly what was going on, but he didn't care. So I said, I need a guitar right now. And he said, well, there's this box in the middle of the floor. It said, buy me $35. There were about 6 guitars in the box, and one was a Burns Bison Jr. Had 5 regular tuning pegs, one other one. And so I grabbed it, tuned it up, plugged in, and said, yeah, this is great. Gave me the $35, put some new strings on it, grabbed a 6-pack of Bud, headed down to Rusk Studios, and that's when we cut Hot Stuff. And then Bad Girls we did with the first iteration of the rolling guitar synthesizer, Prototype.
Ooh, really?
Yeah. The guitar solo on that is the Prototype guitar synthesizer. And of course, Harold Faltermeyer was a total electro geek.
Yeah.
Loved it. Said, oh, we got to have that. More. How you make that work? So we spent more time programming it than we did playing it.
Of course.
But that's kind of how that worked out. And it worked out well. I think Hot Stuff really did jump the barrier between disco and rock. Donna loved it because she was incredible human being anyway, wonderful person, amazing talent. And again, it was like out of her wheelhouse. But she did the shit out of it,
Yeah. Well,
I'm glad you guys like the record.
Oh, we love the record.
Yeah.
And just so you know what Speed of Heat is?
No.
Something defense related.
Well, Sort of. I mean, CJ is an aeronautic, is a aviation buff, and of course, I spend a lot of time with things that are big and go boom and make boom and et cetera, et cetera. So, speed of
Hopefully
heat.
not here, but yeah.
Well, if we ever do a flyover, I'll let you know.
All right.
Detroit's the first on the list, so I know we got to be careful.
Well, I spent a lot of time in Wright-Patterson. We're not that far away.
That's right. Yeah.
At Mach 2.5, we're really close. So the speed of heat is the phenomenon that happens when aerodynamically and thermodynamically, when a body moves and approaches Mach 1, the speed of sound. So we started calling the record Speed of Heat as a working title. When we sent it to the president of the record company, he said, "I love the title of the record." I said, "What's the title of the record?" Speed of Heat. I said, "Okay, do you know what that is?" "No, but I love the title." Okay, so Speed of Heat is, like I said, it's an aerodynamic, thermodynamic phenomenon. Now, if you look, do you have the album cover in front of you?
Looking at it right now.
Okay, look, what do you see behind me?
Looks like some sort of diagram on a chalkboard, like The Beautiful Mind.
Equations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when I first released the record, I got a call from, I was at Northrop Grumman for 20 years working on, well, I can't say, but yeah. And so I get a call from my buddy at Northrop. He says, "I know what those are." So those are oblong pressure wave equations, right? But that's it, boss, speed of heat. So just a little, having some fun, a little fun with the title.
Cool. That's awesome.
Inside nerddom stuff that people love, that people that know love it. Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
The record does bring the heat. It is available for purchase at your website. So if people want to get the CD, go to jeffskunkbaxter.com. When does are the dates already kicked off?
Or Spotify or Apple or whatever you want to do. I don't want to limit anybody to it.
Right. Yep. Exactly. I've been spinning the crap out of it. So
thank you.
Spotify.
I got to get back to Detroit. My half brother buddy sold me a Brooklyn many years ago, which was made in Detroit and Canada, and I dropped a 351 Cleveland in it and drove it down 17 Mile Road at about 135 before I hit the nitrous bottle. Yeah, and then got pulled over. Whatever. But yeah, I love Detroit.
Oh, look us up if you come by.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, thank you. We will play. We played very close to Detroit not that long ago. I'm trying to remember where we were, but it wasn't that far away. We'll come back.
Okay. Yeah. Let us know when you do. Good luck with the tour. The album, everybody's got to go out, spin it, buy it, download it, whatever you got to do. You will love it. There's something for everyone.
There is.
Well, thank you. I mean, it means a lot. I'm amazed anybody cares what I have to say or what I have to play. It just humbles me. Hopefully, I will never have LSD, lead singer's disease. So I just, and being a studio musician is a very good way to keep your shit straight. They don't care who you are. Either you play it right or you're fired. And I think there's something leveling about that. So,
well, yeah. And the requirement, like you were saying, of having to be on time and ready and all that stuff is not something that the prima donnas do. That's something that, once you learn that, you're in an entirely different musician space than, the band guy who just, rehearsals at noon, I'll be there at 3 kind of guy. Yeah.
That's the bass player.
Yeah. Red light turns on and it separates the crap from the ice cream.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. But thank you for your hospitality, and I really appreciate the fact that you like this record, and I'm always looking for input. I listen to everybody and everything because you never know where a good idea comes from. You may call me up sometime and say, "Hey, you should try this song." Yeah, I'll listen. Sure. You never know. So I'm standing by. As we say, rotor's hot.
Awesome. Cool. All right, Skunk, thanks again for coming on. Best of luck with everything.
Hey, guys.
And you may just be hearing from us again.
Sounds good.
I'll be standing by. Thank you.
All right.
Cool. So we'll go up there. And thanks again. This was awesome. We love the album. So
we do.
Thank you so much.
You got to do it again.
Got to remember, I have to give credit to CJ Vanston for his contributions to this. I wouldn't have been able to do this without him.
Well, it's so cool that like you guys met so long ago and then finally got to release this project now.
Yeah, and I knew that as soon as I saw C.J. Vanston in the credits, I was trying to rack my brain. Eventually, I looked him up on Wikipedia, and I know where I knew him from. He had so many numerous projects. But yeah, as soon as I saw that name, it's like, So very cool. Yeah.
Very cool. Well done. Well done. All right. Well, we'll be in touch. First one to say, see Wally Palmer, say hi for the other one. Deal?
Yeah.
I'll be talking to Wally over the weekend.
Oh, he wins.
Okay. Good.
Thanks.
Yep. All right. Cool. Thanks, Skunk.
Right,
Talk to you hopefully again sometime.
Yeah, we'd love to have you on again.
As we say in the Navy, may you have fair winds and following seas. Thank you.
All right.
And that's another way to say ahoy polloi, John.
That's true.
All right. Cool. All right. See you guys. Signing
Thanks,
off.
Jeff. All right. Appreciate
care.
it.